but I have never heard of anything like that happening to human beings. The first time I arrived to the camps, it was unlike anything I've experienced before. It was pain and misery and trauma on a scale so large that it was almost unfathomable, even for somebody who was seeing it right in front of their eyes.
It's a place that isn't equipped to deal. It doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the sanitation, it doesn't have, all these sort of facilities that amount of people need.
The first time I went, we met a woman named Rajuma Begum, and Rajuma had suffered something so horrible that I've never encountered anything like it before. Rajuma had been in her village of Tulatoli in August of 2017. When the village came under attack, she had been taken to a house by members of Myanmar's military. Her child, her baby, had been taken from her arms and then thrown into a fire in front of her face. And then she was gang raped. And when I heard that, I just didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to do. But when she was recounting what had happened to her, she had lost several members of her family, her mother and several siblings. And at one point during the interview, she started crying. And screaming out for her mother who could no longer be there or protect her.
I feel like I'm burning on the inside.
The types of abuses that we heard that had been visited upon Rohingya refugees in the reporting trips that I've been on are among the worst kind of abuses that me and the teams that I worked with had ever heard about as journalists.
We do the job because we want to tell people stories, and I think when you see injustice, you hope that the work you do has some kind of impact. I think you also end up becoming cynical because of how much you see and how much you see continuously happening, and nothing changes.
The Rohingya want justice. Since the earliest days of covering this story, I spoke with Rohingya refugees who wanted the international community to do more, who were dumbfounded by the fact that the international community wasn't doing more.
You have this mass uncertainty of a people that are not wanted, that don't have a state, that don't have an identity almost. They have an identity, but the world doesn't acknowledge it.
They slaughtered my children. They killed everyone. We want the world to help us. Can't the world help us to get our rights?
The UN has said repeatedly that conditions are not yet safe enough in Myanmar for refugees to be able to return. There's still the question of citizenship. They are still stateless. These Rohingya refugees are terrified that they may be forced to return to Myanmar, where horrific atrocities were committed against them.
For all intents and purposes, it seems like these people cannot go back to their original villages. They no longer stand. They no longer exist.
In July of 2018, I met an extraordinary woman by the name of Gul Zahar. She was in her 90s, and where horrific atrocities were committed against them.
For all intents and purposes, it seems like these people cannot go back to their original villages. They no longer stand. They no longer exist.
In July of 2018, I met an extraordinary woman by the name of Gul Zahar. She was in her 90s, and she's the head of 4 generations of family, and those generations are all with her in Cox's Bazar, and her story was really emblematic of the whole experience of the persecution of the Rohingya these past several decades, because she had fled persecution 3 separate times. She fled in the 70s, she fled in the 90s, and then the last time she fled with her family was in 2017.
They beat us. They kidnapped us. They detained us.
Now I was speaking to a survivor of decades of persecution who had fled their home 3 times, a woman in her 90s living with 4 generations of her family in a small, rickety hut, vulnerable to the elements in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.